welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. It's the afternoon of Friday, the 13th of November, 2015. And although that may not sound too auspicious, I think it is an auspicious day. And the reason for this is that ISIS is in big trouble. ISIS is under heavy attack on many fronts. The destruction of ISIS, it seems to me, to any reasonable observer with some military history background, which I guess I have, it is now within sight. The destruction of ISIS within sight, if a decent level of military leadership can be maintained. And of course, the timing of this is not a coincidence. You'll remember that all during August and September, we campaigned implacably for the ouster of ISIS czar Allen, the number one saboteur, the number one subversive, the Benedict Arnold in our military command. And of course, his string puller, the infamous General David Petraeus, right? A dishonored and cashiered general, a felon in the Pentagon and at the top of the CIA. An amazing situation. Anyway, that Petraeus-Allen clique had succeeded in totally sabotaging any reasonable efforts to crush the Islamic State, and they were able to do that for a whole year, from August of 2014 until the end of September 2015. And then our campaign, the Tax Wall Street Party campaign to smash Allen in particular, get him fired, get him out, succeeded in bearing fruit. Now, we couldn't have done that by ourselves in a million years, but there were other forces, clearly, we're not sure exactly even who they were. Maybe eventually when the memoirs come out, we'll know who was reading what at the time. But we can catalyze things. In other words, we can create the conditions where a convergence of pre-existing forces is feasible. And I think that's actually what we've done. So here's the big news. The town of Sinjar in northwestern Iraq, and this is the town which has the large group of Yazidis, the Yazidis being this special ethnic minority. After 24 hours of an offensive, Sinjar has been liberated. The town of Sinjar has been seized out of the bloody hands of the ISIS butchers. And that ought to be good news for anybody who's interested in human civilization, having some kind of a perspective in this our time. This offensive began yesterday. It began in the late hours of Veterans Day, November 11th, Armistice Day in some countries, right? The end of World War I on the Western Front in 1918, November 11th, 1918 at 11 o'clock in the morning, 11/11/11. That's when the beginning of the end came for ISIS, if we can just keep this pressure up. So it is a coalition which includes the YPG Kurds, the Syrian Kurds. It includes the PKK Kurds, and it includes the Peshmerga being the army of the Kurdish state, province, right? Maybe state in the American state sense. The province there in northern Iraq, I think the capital is Erbil. And that, of course, is the problematic one because that is the Barzani and Talibani entity, which has emerged as a result of the 2003 Iraq War. But anyway, all these forces together, YPG, PKK, Peshmerga, the Yazidis have emphatically joined in to liberate their own territory. The Iraqi army, no, but the Iraqi army has its own contribution. The Iraqi army is besieging the town of Ramadi, a little bit further south. So if the Iraqi army is about to envelop Ramadi and put in a formal siege, that will mean it's only a question of time until Ramadi falls. In other words, is liberated. The ISIS butchers kicked out of there also. Now, this began yesterday. The other big story, of course, is the U.S. is providing air cover. Allen was out on the 23rd of October. He was replaced by Brett McGurk, the raunchy diplomat that we've read so much about. You can find him in our daily briefing. Take a look at McGurk, and you'll see some interesting vignettes from his personal life. But McGurk is now in, and McGurk, I guess he can only be a lesser evil when it comes to comparison with Allen. So from October 23rd, when Allen is finally out, the promise had been made in the last week of September. So it took almost 1 month to get him out. And then we get the offensive beginning on the 11th of November. So it took a couple of weeks. But as soon as you get Allen out, ISIS begins to lose. As long as you've got Allen in there, ISIS is winning, at least in terms of the public relations. So Allen, the kiss of death, and now he's out. So this began the other morning, and we've got B-1 bombers of the U.S. involved. We haven't heard anything about B-1 bombers, right? It's a valid tool. And these A-10 Warthogs, right, the so-called tank busters, the close support aircraft that have been contributing to the rout of ISIS. So within 24 hours, Sinjar has fallen and ISIS is out. They are a paper tiger. They're not the junior varsity. No, indeed. They're the interclub. They're the intramural level. So amateurish and inept and bungling are they. And remember, all these commentators telling you that they're invincible, that they're 20 feet tall, that they have 7-league boots, magical powers, all this stuff. All garbage. All hype. So the significance of this strategically is that the town of Sinjar controls, to a certain degree, Highway 47. Highway 47 is one key east-west line of communication. It's a paved highway, and it starts in Mosul over in northern Iraq, and it goes to Sinjar, and then it passes into Syria, crosses the Syrian border, and gets you to Raqqa. So right now, the ISIS terrorist capital in Raqqa has been cut off from what I believe is the largest city they've ever conquered, which is Mosul. Mosul having about 1 million people. Raqqa, I think, somewhat smaller. So what you can see there is a wedge has been driven into the terrorist state, and it's going to fall apart into two segments, right? It's like capturing Vicksburg, if you want to compare it to something a little bit closer to home, right? You cut the line of communications from east to west. Now, this is not exactly what I've been campaigning for, right? Let that also be clear. I am saying the most economical, the most elegant, if you want, solution is to close that corridor between Jarablus on the west bank of the Euphrates, close that corridor that stretches approximately 100 kilometers west from Jarablus and reaches then this area of Ephron. Interdict that area, and you've cut the overall ISIS supply line. You can look at any map of the territory controlled by ISIS, and you'll see that it's a broad aorta of supplies that come down from Turkey and through that Jarablus to Ephron corridor, the Jarablus to Ephron gap. That is what should have been interdicted. But this, of course, is a step in the right direction. It's better than nothing, and it can now be used to increase pressure to do what I've been saying. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., and it's the afternoon, once again, of Friday the 13th of November. So, undeterred by that, we say it's auspicious. The key town of Sinjar in northwest Iraq has fallen within 24 hours to a coalition of YPG Kurds from Syria, PKK Kurds, Peshmerga Kurds, Yazidis, and U.S. air power, the B-1 bomber, the A-10 Warthog, all acquitting themselves very well. And what this shows, of course, is that with the right kind of diplomacy and the right kind of effort, the defeatism and the appeasement of terrorism and the toadying and pandering to terrorism carried out by Allen and the Petraeus clique, this would have been swept aside much earlier. So Allen out on October 23rd, and therefore this event coming now, 2 weeks later. I told you so. This, I think, confirms in spades what I've been telling you about the importance of Allen, right? That nobody else got it, but here we got it, and a number of people have figured it out with our help, which we think is admirable. Right? A lot of people have caught on to what this is. Now, it's this key highway, the East-West Highway, Highway 47, splits the entire terrorist congeries into two parts, Mosul on one side, Raqqa on the other. The basic idea is that ISIS is too weak to hold on to both sides. So they're going to have to give up Mosul or Raqqa. They should decide they are terrorists and they should be defeated. So we have to be implacable. Keep up the pressure. Don't be diverted. And I also repeat the invitation. That corridor between Jarablus on the Euphrates and Ephraim has got to be closed, interdicted, blocked. The supply lines there cut. It is certainly interesting that we've heard about supply lines for ISIS. We've heard more of that in the past 48 hours than we've heard in the past year before that, because obviously ISIS, of course, they're invincible, and they don't need supply lines. They do it all with magic carpets or something like this. No, they don't. They have supply lines just like everybody else. However, what I've been saying up to now about Highway 47 is undercut by the newspaper of record. Yes, indeed, the gray lady. The New York Times now says, aha, ISIS can levitate their trucks. That the U.S. or Iraq or the Kurds, they need to have paved highways so they can drive around with tanks and large trucks and other larger vehicles, but not ISIS, because they say ISIS can go on the non-paved roads that ISIS drives around all the time in these pickup trucks with machine guns on the back, right? Isuzu or Toyota with a machine gun on the back. So ISIS, they say, doesn't need paved roads, right? They're Superman qualities. They live on even in defeat. It's just amazing. So that's what the New York Times says. Take a look at the daily briefing. You can find it at tarpley.net and other locations. And we have some choice quotes from the New York Times in there where they try to argue, no, you can't cut their supply lines that easily because they can use these unpaved roads, right? They go like ships of the desert, I'm sure. Just to keep score, right, concerning what really should be done and still should be done, and which now becomes easier, which is to interdict, to shut that door between Jarablus and Ephraim. A correspondent on the National Public Radio Diane Rehm show this morning, the famous International Hour, is a guy called Bowman. He's the NPR Pentagon correspondent. He says that if the Kurds cross the Euphrates, that is considered to be very serious by the wonderful Turks, and that he said something rather cryptic. I'm trying to get the quote. It'll be in the morning briefing on Saturday. The Turkish, he says there's a Turkish brigadier general, a Turkish one-star general, who is doing something interesting in terms of this gap. Now, that sounds like a bunch of hokum, right, from Turkish intelligence, MIT, trying to say, well, everybody says we should close the gap, but guess what? We're already doing it. It's good bureaucratic practice, right? If somebody tells you to do something, the best answer is I'm already doing it. Now, we've also got, this is another interesting thing. Our activity, I'm convinced, is forcing various people out in the open, right? One of these things is the Turks have got to come up with a story about how that gap is being closed, and they're not really, of course, the main supply line for ISIS. here we have a rare cameo appearance by Noam Chomsky. Noam is in the Washington Post of this morning, Friday, November 13th. Turkey muzzles democracy's watchdogs. Now, notice the charge here from Noam is not that Erdogan is really the caliph of ISIS or that his son is part of the oil smuggling operation, which is now in trouble because that road is exactly where those trucks had to go. The oil is not in Raqqa. The oil is over there in Mosul. So the supply line goes both ways. Anyway, Noam, Turkey muzzles democracy's watchdog. So this is essentially the story of how the Erdogan government and Davutoglu are crushing the opposition. This is the classic limited hangout. Classic limited hangout, people, in the sense, if I say, Stalin beats his dog, I've really said something good about him, right? Because the crimes are much greater. And over here, if you say, oh, Erdogan, you're mean to the journalists. Wait a minute. You're the caliph of the ISIS state, and your children work for it. And you're the kingpin of this entire thing. So if all I say is Guillaume writing together with Christopher Deloire, Secretary General of Reporters Without Borders. See, this is all about reporters. What about the fact that without those Turkish supplies, ISIS could not exist? That's exactly what a limited hangout is. So congratulations to Guillaume for another limited hangout, but I'm sorry, we're not going to fall for it. This is running interference for Erdogan. Noam Chomsky runs interference for Erdogan. There you see it, right there, by being silent about what he really does, what Erdogan really does. Okay? So that's a very serious matter. Now let's run down a couple of other aspects to the entire thing. There is this strange atmosphere of intrigue in the Pentagon, and I don't know what this is, but I do know that the timing is significant. In other words, this is now a watershed, right? The Free Sinjar, Operation Free Sinjar, the offensive, that's a phase change in the entire thing. And at this point, Ashton Carter fires the lieutenant general who was his principal military aide. Got to back to World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. And my last item of the previous segment was Ashton Carter, right? The utopian pedant. Somebody who I don't think is too happy with the fall of Sinjar and the humiliation of ISIS and the collapse now of their myth of invincibility and invulnerability. Ashton Carter on Thursday, the first day of this new offensive, has fired Army Lieutenant General Ron Lewis from his post as senior military advisor to the Secretary of Defense, and has said that this case will now be given to the Inspector General of the Pentagon to determine the facts, and the Department of the Army will then act accordingly. This guy, Lieutenant General Ron Lewis of the Army, is one of relatively few black generals, right? The Army has about 310, 320 generals, somewhere in there, and not so many are black. He's the only one from the Chicago area, as we learn. Now, the Washington Post, citing an insider, says the dismissal involved an alleged improper relationship. What does that mean? With a woman, with a spy, with somebody else, right? What does that mean? Watch out, because remember, when they want to get rid of you for political reasons, like Petraeus, like Allen for that matter, and this is whether you're good, bad, or indifferent, they generally don't do it on the political issue involved, but they get you on either sex or money, right? Embezzlement, stuff like this, expense account fraud or what have you. So let's look at this entire situation now. The other news, of course, is there was a large bomb in southern Beirut in a Shiite area thought to be friendly to Hezbollah. So 50 dead about and 200 wounded. So that would be a retaliation by ISIS, who claim responsibility, or some ally of ISIS, attacking Hezbollah. And Hezbollah has done yeoman service, right? Indispensable role in helping the Syrian Arab army to fight ISIS and other terrorists. There is a battle going on in the Turkish city of Silvan. That's in southeast Anatolia. And that's the Turkish army against the PKK. And that's been going on for a week or so. I believe I already mentioned the Iraqi army is besieging Ramadi and will soon have encircled that area. The ISIS terrorists will be boxed in. Hats off to the Syrian Arab army. They have now lifted the siege of Kuwairis Air Base. So that confirms that's the second or third significant milestone of the Syrian Arab army. And of course, congratulations to the Russian airstrikes that have made that possible. We've also got, the U.S. now claims to have killed Jihadi John. And that would be this character that we've seen in the beheading films, right? There are a lot of questions about these, right? We can't get into all that stuff. But whatever they were, this guy seems to have been in them. And the word this morning is that a U.S. drone has killed Jihadi John, British terrorist in Syria. The Israelis have carried out airstrikes against Syrian territory, and it is thought in particular against parts of Syrian territory where Hezbollah is present. Now, and I think those are some of the principal things that are going on. President Putin of Russia says the Russians are announcing for the last 2 days 107 sorties and 289 targets. And I think this is precisely the kind of emulation you need, right? If you don't keep pace, you will lose face. So now the U.S. has finally done something. So we're hoping maybe Russia will, at this point, say, yes, indeed, why don't we interdict that infamous Jarablus to Efren corridor? I would call on President Putin at this point to do that. I would say that the Russian interest and the human interest of humanity would be well served by having Russia get to work on interdicting those supply lines, because that's the whole ball game right there. If you interdict those, then ISIS collapses just about everywhere. Putin now says that Russia is willing to work together with anybody. They've been working together with the Free Syrian Army. They've gotten target information from the Free Syrian Army telling them where ISIS is, and some of that they have acted on. And he points to the fact that the U.S. has been slow to act, and that's certainly true. But now Allen is out. So I think the U.S. is at least on the way, has made a first step towards redeeming the national honor of the United States from this shameful, horrendous phase of appeasement and phony war imposed by Petraeus and Allen and their networks, right? Some of those guys have to be fired. Now, they have not given up. Above all, Allen has not given up. We have an interview with Allen here. This is this charming lady, Elise Labat, the CNN editor who usually, she travels with Hillary and stuff like this. So the hallmark of the Allen networks, of the appeasement, phony war, and I would say treason networks, is that they've got to be very pessimistic. Man, Sinjar falls in 24 hours. They can say, well, maybe we can roll up ISIS within a couple of weeks. Why not? Yeah, there are some booby traps, but who cares? Mop them up, right? Leave some other troops to do that and send the elite guys on to the next attack. All right, so they're mopping up. But so we have Allen coming out saying, it's what he's essentially, he doesn't come out and say it, but he wants to bomb Assad. He wants to bomb Assad. So he says the following: if we don't get at those issues over the long term, not just be compelled to constantly be fighting the symptoms of the problem. See, the problem is really Assad, and ISIS is a symptom, is what he thinks, which is the symptoms of the problems, which is, I think, are Al-Qaeda and which is Al-Qaeda and which is Daesh. If we don't get to the left of those symptoms and try to solve these underlying circumstances, working collaboratively with those who are in the region, who best understand the region, then we're going to be condemned to fight forever. So Sinjar falls in 24 hours. Allen tells CNN, we're going to have to fight forever. Are we nuts? Are we insane? And this poor woman, of course, never says anything to contradict him. Also, Allen loves the Saudis. He doesn't say anything about the fact that the Saudis are the ones who sent in all the killers and the butchers to begin with. He says the Saudis have been very aggressive in providing support on a humanitarian level. Man, even Bernie Sanders could not have topped that. Allen also loves the Emiratis. Allen would love to have a no-fly zone over Syria, but the time is not right anymore. The time is no longer right. And what else does he say? Allen also tries to repeat this idiotic legend that there was this wonderful time in the early spring of 2011 when there were peaceful demonstrations. And if only Assad had opened his eyes to those wonderful peaceful demonstrators, then we could have had a peaceful solution. This is a big lie. This is insane. There's been a violent Muslim Brotherhood, CIA, MI6-backed opposition against the Syrian government since the early 1980s at the latest, certainly. Big massacre. There never was a nonviolent phase. Those demonstrators had firearms from the word go. And we'll be back in a minute. Back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, the idea, therefore, is you can tell the agents now, because anybody who's honest and reality-oriented would say, hey, the fall of Sinjar means that ISIS is a paper tiger. Let's destroy them quickly right now. Why should people have to stay under ISIS control until the springtime? The people in the Allen Petraeus side of things come out and say, like Allen says, we could be at war, quote, forever, unquote, forever. ISIS is forever. A diamond may not be forever, but ISIS is forever, says General Allen of the Marine Corps. Oh, I forgot to mention, Allen wants to be Secretary of State. Can you believe it? He wants to be rewarded for his sabotage by being on the list, right? He's always willing to come back and do something for the country. Yeah, right. God help us. Don't let Allen become Secretary of State, right? Maybe he already sees that there's something going on with Ash Carter and his military aide there. We still don't know what that is. So we've got another guy, this character Bowman, I think, from the National Public Radio. He says the people that he's talking to, Alan Cleek, I suppose, they're all pessimistic. It's going to take 3 years to get to Mosul. To get from Sinjar to Mosul, it's less than 100 miles, at least from my viewing of the map, right? You drive down the road, right? You push these ISIS clowns aside. 3 years. How can anybody make such an estimate, right? What would go into making that estimate? Quite apart from the fact that it's crazy. You could put paratroopers in there in 2 days, not 3 years. And then, of course, we've got just here in Washington, the congressmen listen to this. They want to know about the traffic on the way home. WTOP, they say it's going to take years of war to defeat ISIS. And other people say, no, decades of war. This is all absolute insanity. And fortunately, it looks like things are lining up so that ISIS can be crushed. So let's also point out Russia has installed the S-400 Growler surface-to-air missile system quite capable. Goes up to 90,000 feet and goes 100 miles out, I guess it is, or something like that, in various directions. The British are afraid that the Royal Air Force Base on Cyprus, that is to say, Akrotiri, the British have sovereign bases still on Cyprus. They've got that. I think they've had Cyprus since the Crimean War, although I'm perhaps just guessing. But they've got Akrotiri. So they're afraid that the Growler can shoot their planes as soon as they take off from Akrotiri. Let them therefore be deterred. So you got all that. Now also, Obama is headed for Turkey. He's going right into this area. There will be now, in the next couple of days, and we hope to keep up with it, the G20, the group of 20 countries economically, who are the principal economic powers of the world, and that is going to be hosted by Erdogan. So there's going to be an Obama-Erdogan summit at the edge of that event. He's going to Turkey, Obama then going to the Philippines, then going to Malaysia. And normally this is the time when we say, oh my God, Obama's going out of town. What will Allen and the Petraeus clique do once the president is away? Now, thank God, at least I hope, we don't have to worry about that quite as much now that Allen has been knocked out of the box. But Obama is going. So there'll be various things on economics. So we also ought to look at the fact that the British are now on a big offensive, and we'll have more about this in the coming weeks. But here's the idea. You see that the British have Modi of India there. They've had General Sisi of Egypt. They've had President Xi. What they seem to be doing is dancing the round of their own former colonies to try to reassemble some kind of a group. In other words, the British, I think, are eager to jump to the conclusion that the U.S. position in the world is collapsing. This is classic British doctrine, right? Perfide Albion, right? This is what they like. So they've had a whole bunch of high-profile visits, right? So India was a colony. Egypt was a colony. China might as well have been one after the Opium Wars, 3 of them. We've got this interesting article, I recommend it actually, in the Voltaire network, the Réseau Voltaire, that it is the British who are guiding the Chinese in their campaign against the dollar. Now, a lot of people, as soon as you say campaign against the dollar, they start salivating in a Pavlovian manner that this is something good. Maybe it's not so good. Maybe the system that the British are trying to sell to the Chinese is not so good at all. Maybe it's pretty naive to think that it's automatically better. And again, our dear friend, the Italian economist Tarpley, reminded us, you guys complain about U.S. world domination. Wait till you try Chinese world domination. You'll be screaming out of the other side of your mouth. So let's bear that in mind. What else can we say about some of these other items? I guess we better go to the Republican debate. We do want to talk about the Democratic debate, which is coming up on Saturday. We propose people should go there if they can. But here's the idea. The Republican debate, which was held, I believe, on Tuesday evening of this week, was a monstrosity. And it is, I think, the turning point for Trump is unquestionably, from my estimate, when Trump said that wages are too high. I would regard that as a piece of political suicide. And if you saw that, where he says wages are too high, we're not going to raise the minimum wage, that is a clip. If he ever gets the Republican nomination, you will see that until it comes out of your ears. Remember the Romney tirade about the 49% who don't want to work, and some indignant member of the wait staff taped him and destroyed his candidacy? In the case of Trump, he's done it openly. Here's what he says. Let's see. He says that if you want to be competitive, you can't do that. Let's see who writes this up. Here, Eugene Robinson in today's Washington Post. Here's Trump. Remember, the current minimum wage federally set, $7.25 an hour. That's a bad joke. That has not been changed in years. So quote says, Trump says, I hate to say it, but we have to leave it the way it is. In other words, don't raise the minimum wage. Says Trump, the allegedly populist billionaire. People have to go out. They have to work really hard and have to get into that upper stratum. But we cannot do this if we're going to compete with the rest of the world. We just can't do it. Okay, so if you thought that Trump was a populist, you're a fool, and you better open your eyes to that right now. He is a plutocrat. He's a finance oligarch. He's the darling, the creature of the Wall Street banks who have financed his dubious operations. It's also interesting. He proposes the U.S. should be competitive on the backs of working people. How about the idea that this mass of Wall Street parasites with their bonuses and their ripoffs and their derivatives, maybe that's the luxury we can't afford. Maybe it's time to cut them down to size. But no, says Trump, we've got to do it by keeping the minimum wage at $7.25 an hour. And that means the entire pay scale is depressed. So this is also, we have this woman, Jennifer Rubin. She's kind of a resident neocon at the Washington Post. And she's essentially warning, saying, Trump, that is a big, fat target for Democrats in the time of wage stagnation. It also contradicts the fact that he's concerned about immigration. Back in a minute, World Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. Let us tarry a little bit longer with the Republican presidential debate. Now, the general form of this debate is the monsters from the id. In other words, the dark places of the American mind are being accessed by trained demagogues. But nevertheless, some of it is revelatory, especially when Trump starts to say that there should be no increase in the minimum wage. I hate to say it, but we have to leave it the way it is. People have got to go out. They've got to go to work really hard and get into that upper stratum. But we cannot do this when we're going to compete with the rest of the world. We just can't do it. So sacrifice what amounts to the working poor, young people. Is that what you call populism, Trump? That's not populism. That's for plutocrats. You're talking like the finance oligarch from Wall Street, which you are, you faker. So remember the New York governor debate a little while ago when the guy said, the rent is too damn high? Trump is saying wages are too damn high. And again, mark that soundbite well. If he gets any nomination at all, you're going to hear that 24/7, and he's going to deserve it. That he is a cruel exploiter, right? A plutocrat, impudent, outrageous from this guy. Now, I have to flatter myself. I have a certain ear. When I heard that, I said, that's the beginning of the end for this character. But notice he was not alone. The megalomaniac Trump, who does everything with the power of the will, the triumph of the will, and the irresistible force of his magnetic personality. Undoubtedly a Freemason, too. Carson says, every time we raise the minimum wage, the number of jobless people increases. Don't give them everything. He says we cannot allow people. We want to allow them to ascend the ladder of opportunity. I don't know, where is it? Where's the bottom rung? Rather than give them everything and keep them dependent. So workers are coddled, according to the demagogue Carson. Now, I have also made clear Carson is mentally unstable. Carson is not all there. Carson has got more than one screw loose up there. And he's also he's a mixture of megalomaniac and mythomaniac. And we have this amazing situation where he doesn't say Vote for me, and as your president, I pledge to serve you by doing 1, 2, 3. No such thing. He says, look at my autobiography. Look at my life story. It's compelling. Compelling is the way these guys in K Street and Madison Avenue talk about it. It's compelling. So you got to vote for me based on my life story. But then these journalists come along and they say, well, we have no proof that you hit your mother in the head with a hammer. We have no proof that you tried to kill your friend Bob, but the knife got stuck in the belt buckle. And then Carson says, yes, I did hit my mother. Yes, I did try to kill my friend Bob. So we have this situation where the things that the normal person would want to disprove, I'd say, oh, no, I never hit my mother. What is that? Be a monster. He can't do that. So instead, he's got to affirm the fact that he was a criminal. What's the percentage in this? Well, of course, he's got a certain target group of dupes in mind, and I'm afraid it's the religious, what can we say, the religious conservatives, I guess, I think that's really too nice. But you get the idea, right? The people in Iowa and similar places who they want to show the story of redemption. So what he's saying is, look at me, how depraved I was. Look how bad I was. I was practically a killer. But then I found the Lord. I found Jesus. And now I have turned my life around. And this is the narrative that a lot of people want to hear because they feel that this is the story of their own lives. I would just say a recent, within the past 100 years or so, one of the most prominent political figures to have used a reasoning of this type is Rasputin, the debauched advisor or more to the Tsar Nicholas II of Russia and the Empress, the Tsarina. Remember, Rasputin would say, yes, I go to brothels. Yes, I get drunk. Yes, I do all this stuff. But that just shows that God's mercy and forgiveness, they are infinite. And I'm cashing in every day on the infinite kind of forgiveness that you can get. All right. Carson also says that in the ghetto, in the inner city, the reason that wages and jobs are scarce and wages are low is some people have high wages. So he says we got to get that down. We've got to essentially strip these people. Now, he has some strange criteria. He's got this friend Alfonso Costa, who seems to be a very dubious figure. God knows. When I saw this first, I thought, uh-oh, as Nixon had Bebe Rebozo, right, his sort of sleazy friend, well, if Nixon had Bebe Rebozo and he got away with that, then Carson has Alfonso Costa. Oh, God. Now, I think you're going to find a lot of people will say this week marks the collapse of Trump or the beginning of the end for Trump. But they're not going to say that it's because he refuses to raise the minimum wage. And again, Trump is against raising the minimum wage. Carson, I think, is against any minimum wage. That was what I heard. And Rubio may well be against any minimum wage. But what's going to happen is people will not refer, the establishment commentators, will not refer to the wage question, the minimum wage question. No, they can't let that loom as the decisive thing. They're going to have to say Trump had a tirade. Now, this is a big story today. The Trump tirade in Iowa, Fort Dodge, could it be there? Anyway, Trump says that Carson is pathological. He's like a child molester. He's a liar. He will never heal. That the story of the knife breaking when it hit the belt buckle is unbelievable, and therefore Carson's whole rationale of his campaign falls to the ground. And this was the Trump policy on ISIS is bomb the blankety blank 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 out of ISIS, right? Bomb them to hell, bomb them back into the Stone Age. The problem with that is military strategy can't be done that way. That was what was tried in Vietnam and indeed in Cambodia. And no matter how many bombs you have, it does not work. There's got to be an element of strategy. The old saying is amateurs talk about tactics. professionals talk about logistics, and that means you got to take care of your own logistics, and you got to be looking to cut the other guy's logistics. So we have on the minimum wage, the Republicans are monstrous. Rubio basically says, no college for you, no college for you. You should get vocational training, you losers out there, says Rubio. Rubio, where are your kids? Have you sent them to vocational school, or have you put them into the best college you can get if you have any kids, or where are you planning to put them? They all want a flat tax. A flat tax is a bonanza, a windfall for rich parasites. That's all it is. It's simple. Carly Fiorina says that she's going to boil the tax code down to 3 pages. Man, that must be micro writing, right? If she can put it all, maybe she can put it all on the head of a pin. But the outcome is going to be that the tax bill for the oligarchs is going to go down. Also with Trump says, I'm going to take away carried interest. Carried interest loophole is worth about $2 billion to Wall Street. But he's going to reward them with no estate tax, no oligarch tax, right? When those oligarchs shuffle off this mortal coil, that's when you could get one last chance to soak them. But no. And that's worth $20 billion. So Trump taketh away $2 billion and giveth $20 billion. He's a friend of the oligarchs. The carried interest is simply a cover story. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We are very happy now to go to Damascus, Syria, to get another report from our distinguished friend there, Thierry Maison of the Voltaire Network. And we've essentially got 3 items on the table. One is what's happening militarily on the ground. Secondly, the U.S. Actions together with the Kurds. What does that mean about the overall strategy by the U.S. in particular? And thirdly, there are now these Vienna talks, which have taken place again today. Do we get anything out of that? So, Thierry, welcome. And why don't you start with the first point?
Yes, the first question is about the military action inside Syria. So, at the first phase of the Russian bombing in Syria, we have seen a lot of jihadists going away, but of course there was no change in the lines of the fighting. And right now is the second phase in the fight with the action on the ground by the Arab Syrian army. So right now we can see that the jihadists are losing the ground in Aleppo and near Palmyra. So, of course, the army needs 1 or 2 months to fight out the jihadists from those 2 cities, but it's clearly going now. And we can hope for the victory in January, something like that. That's the first point. The second point is about the Kurds. If you remember, in 2013, the New York Times published a new map for the reshaping of the Middle East. In an article signed by Robin Wright, at that time the journalist was working for the Pentagon. And according to this map, Daesh will be created to make a Silistan in Al-Anbar district in Iraq and in the Syrian desert. And also, according to this map, they have to create a Kurdistan in the north of Syria, but unfortunately this part of Syria is without Kurds. But there is only 30% of the people in this part of Syria who were Kurds at that time. And so right now, the US, Israel, and France together launched a new attack in the north of Syria with the Kurdish Syrians to conquer this part of Syria and create a new Kurdistan. So this is very strange because it means that the Kurdish party of the Syrian Kurds shift from the Damascus side to the Washington side. It's very surprising because they want to create a kind of colonial state in the north of Syria, but until now, this Kurdish party was a Marxist-Leninist one, and it's surprising to see they are now with a colonial project. So, because of that, you are at the same time in Iraq, the US and the Kurds from Iraq fighting together in the Sinjar mountain against Daesh, against the Islamic State. So, if you remember, since 1 year and a half, neither the US was really fighting against the Islamic State, except since the 14 July, when they signed the agreement with Iran, and 2 weeks later, they bombed the Islamic State in Hasakeh, Syria. It was the first action, the first real action of the coalition against Daesh. After 1 year, during then they support Daesh, they don't fight against him.
Right.
So the result of this action is that right now all the Christians in the north of Syria are making a new coalition against the Kurds because, of course, they will not accept to be governed by the Kurds like that. And right now, the Kurdish party entering the schools in the north of Syria, they expel the teachers, and they put new teachers from Kurdish origin, but we don't know exactly from where they are going, if they are Syrian, Turks, or Iraqis. And they began a new teaching only in Kurdish language, no more in Arabic. And the first thing we have to see, the third thing is about the negotiation in Vienna. If you remember, it was decided that the United Nations will organize 4 different groups with people from the opposition and people from the Syrian government, and they will have some talks about the future of Syria. In fact, the idea was to know exactly the position of the 2 groups and to make report to the member of the Security Council. It was not a negotiation. It was a kind of tool, in fact, to know exactly how the Syrian government and its opposition, its multiple opposition, can accept or refuse different proposals. But they changed this plan, and right now it seems that in Vienna they will have only 2 groups, and they will negotiate for the future of Syria, and especially they will negotiate who will be responsible to vote a new constitution. I think this is a very bad news because, as you know, always the problem in democracy is who is writing the constitution. And if
Kerry, hold that thought. We'll get you back in the next segment. If you can hang on for a minute or two, we'll be right back, and you can complete that, and maybe I can ask you 1 or 2 things, okay? Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We are talking with Thierry Meyssan in Damascus, Syria, keeping up with this fast-moving situation. Now, Thierry, you were saying that the Vienna talks have taken a wrong turn, and that we've got two groups are going to try to produce a new constitution. When you say two groups, does that mean two groups from inside Syria?
No, it looks that the main powers want to first make a list of the leaders of the opposition who will negotiate the constitution with the government.
Mm-hmm.
But if they succeed to have this list, it means that the constitution will be right half by the opposition, half by the government. Of course, this is nonsense. And the only way to write a constitution is to have a special assembly for that, elected by all the citizens. But of course, the U.S. will not accept that, because if there is a constitutional assembly, certainly this assembly will reject the idea of a Muslim society, but this assembly will have a secular constitution. But if we have this system with half and half, the constitution will be a compromise, not at all something, not at all a project for the country, but a way to help foreign states to have their hand in this country. So I'm afraid because of this evolution, but fortunately, today there was a clash between John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov. It seems that John Kerry invites new states to this negotiation in Vienna without consulting Sergei Lavrov. Mm-hmm. So it means that the U.S. tried to push to change the composition of the negotiators in Vienna to be sure that they will choose the good opposition according to them. So I mean the opposition linked to Washington and to NATO.
Right. In other words, the moderate terrorists. Well, so it sounds like the danger
is the moderate terrorists, exactly. The moderate terrorists. This is the
rotten. The danger is therefore a rotten compromise that would lead to a weak state and to Syria continuing as the plaything of foreign powers, right? Rather than asserting independence.
Yes, but there is no solution in Syria. There is always an option for the Muslim Brotherhood to enter in this country. Since 1978, the Muslim Brotherhood tried to reverse the secular regime here. And you know that in 1978 they made a lot of attacks in this country until 1982, when they tried to perform a coup d'etat against the Syrian Arab Republic. And this ended in a big fight in Hama. And right now, the Muslim Brotherhood again is the big organizer on the ground of the fight with the support of the U.S. So if this continues, we will never have the peace in Syria.
Okay. Thierry, thank you very much. It's always very illuminating. I hope we can get you back next week. Things are moving fast, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from you again. Thank you very much.
Okay. See you. Goodbye.
So that was Thierry Masson of the Voltaire Network speaking from Damascus, Syria, and the most up-to-date and the most insightful that you're going to find anywhere. So thanks again to Thierry. Now, our time is dwindling. We got to catch up with these Republicans, right? The crimes of the Republicans have somehow become overwhelming. I actually heard that some people said, oh, these Republicans are better. Anybody who thinks the Republicans are a viable alternative. Better get their head examined right away. Trump is not a populist. Trump is a plutocrat. Carson is mentally unstable. Rubio is simply a demagogue, right? A typical lying politician. Rubio is telling you you can't go to college. The other thing is all the laws have been suspended, right? When, for example, Perry, the last time around, Perry said he wanted to wipe out 4 or 5 executive departments, and he couldn't name them all. He was laughed off the stage. That was the end of Perry. This time around, we have Cruz, the sallow-faced hypocrite, who says, I want to wipe out 4, and he says the Department of Commerce, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Commerce and Energy. There we go, 4. Or maybe he wanted to give us 5. So by rights, Cruz should be driven off the podium because of his idiotic methods there. The other funny thing, as some commentators have pointed out, they all want the flat tax. Flat tax means tax cuts for the rich. Haven't you had enough of that? Trickle-down economics? And they lie. Generally speaking, their tax breaks for the rich add up to about $1 trillion a year. So $1 trillion more in the deficit. This is from the party that has been screaming about the deficit since 2008, right? Because their privileges are under attack. The other thing is when Trump says, I don't want immigration coming in, right? I hate the aliens, as he puts it. He does this, he says, because I don't want your wages to be driven down. Well, if you care about anybody's wages, Trump, why don't you advocate an increase in the minimum wage? Because that increase will essentially shift the entire wage scale upwards. It'll be a boon to so many people who have no idea of these connections, but they will be the beneficiaries. Another piece of idiocy, the Bank of America. If Bank of America is going to fail, Cruz, what would you do? Let it go bankrupt, let it bring down the entire system, have a total world depression. No. There's lots of other paths, right? You don't have to bail out Bank of America. You seize it. You nationalize it. You take control and you say, guess what? All the derivatives are shredded, deleted, abrogated, burned, whatever you want. No more derivatives. So the other thing about this I have to mention, right? They hate philosophy. It's not a surprise, right? Here, where the monsters from the id are on parade, right? Trump has long been recognized as a big id. Carson is an id of a different type. Rand Paul, of course. The commentators figure that Rand Paul and Kasich will both drop through trapdoors in the stage, right? Like the Tales of Hoffman in most productions, right? They're just going to go down, and that's going to be the end of them. But philosophers, right? Rubio says we need more welders and fewer philosophers. I can see why he says that. I mean, philosopher today generally is consumer fraud, but the idea of a philosopher, say a Plato, we could really use such a person here in the United States. We need Platonic philosophers, right? And Rubio says no. The other one with Cruz says the people running the Federal Reserve are a group of philosopher kings, by which he means that to be derogatory, that it's bad to be a philosopher king. So the Republican Party, monsters from the id, everyone, go on record against Plato, because that's what it is, the philosopher kings, Plato Republic. So they are despicable. Don't have anything to do with them. And if you find that attractive, you're depraved. Back in a minute. Video got on here in our final segment of our program for Friday, the 13th of November, 2015. Let's look at the Iowa debate, right? We've gone through the monstrosities, right? The monsters from the id at the Republican debate, right? The dark places of the American mind being accessed in the way that old Joe McCarthy used to. The debate is in Iowa on Saturday night. That is Saturday, the 14th of November. It's going to be on CBS. I would urge people, if you're in Iowa, you should show up with signs. you should find where Chris Matthews or whoever else is pontificating, get in the shot, right? Get behind them. Do what we did at the inauguration in 2012 when we had our Wall Street sales tax right in the faces of all the CNN viewers because we camped out precisely where they had their cameras set up. I would say to Martin O'Malley, if you want to have any hope of getting anywhere, you should forget about this attack on Bernie as not a real Democrat. Forget that. No traction there. O'Malley, talk about Bernie and the Saudis. Play the Saudi card, the Saudi atrocities card, the Saudi crucifixions and beheadings and other monstrosities, right? Mutilations, cutting off people's hands and feet. The Saudis are guilty of genocide in Yemen. They're cutting off food to the entire country. Millions of people are on the verge of actually dying. Then we've got these charming Saudi political executions, including the guy who just won the Sakharov Prize of the European Parliament, threatened to have his head chopped off. Could happen any hour. Could overtake me during the course of the show. Jubair, this character we had here in Washington, right? He's the guy who said, the Iranians tried to kill me. Nonsense. That was MEK, right? Mujahideen Khalq, CIA. That's Jubair. Jubair now says, if you don't get Assad out of there, we'll remove him with military means. Well, that's pretty dangerous talk. So here we have a Dark Ages absolute monarchy. Bernie loves it. What a social democrat he is. And, of course, the status of women is a monstrosity. So, O'Malley, somebody confront Bernie Sanders on his seamless, stubborn support for the Dark Ages monarchy of Saudi Arabia. He wants to make them the gendarme of the Middle East. They make the Middle East safe for imperialism in Bernie's system. So I just urge anybody of goodwill, I think one or two people may be on their way to Iowa tomorrow evening. Get some signs out there. The signs should say, Bernie, condemn your Saudi friends and their beheadings and crucifixions. Or Bernie, condemn Saudi genocide in Yemen. Those are your friends. So, and of course, the tax question, well, we know the answer to that. It's a 1% Wall Street sales tax. That's the answer to all of these Republicans. So we're going to see what that looks like. Generally speaking, Bernie now seems to regret the fact that he gave Hillary that pass on her emails. Now he's whining that was a mistake. Well, Bernie, you are inept. And the other thing people are noting, right, is he's not getting any black support. There's a lily white campaign, always a bad thing. And as long as Bernie is railing against the 1% of billionaires, or whatever they are, the billionaire class, that sounds okay. Although there are no specifics, zero specifics on any of that. He lacks detail. He doesn't come up with the specs. And as soon as you get him on foreign policy, he's a disaster. He's a warmonger in a party that has spent the last 12 years talking about nothing but the great questions of war and peace, which was correct to do. Okay, now, if the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, we're going to have a situation where there's no QE, no quantitative easing. The money supply will not be in an expansive phase. And if they start raising interest rates, hold on to your hat. There'll be no Santa Claus rally this year. There's going to be some kind of a sickening downturn. Notice the Portuguese government. The Portuguese government elected 50+%, came in there and they said, look, we want to get out of NATO. We want to get out of the EU. We want to end austerity above all. So the president of the republic says, sorry, I'm not allowing you to form the government. I'm only going to use reactionaries. Some action in Catalonia to break up Spain. That's a British operation from beginning to end. And most of these things in Europe are that. Anybody talking secessionism in Europe, get your head examined on that one too. Ted Koppel, remember him? Nightline, otherwise known as Night Lies. He says there's going to be a cyber attack on the U.S. and that there is no plan. He says that the Secretary of Homeland Security, J. Johnson, has no plan. Well, I'm thinking back now to 2001, And right after 9/11, within those couple of weeks, I can remember that Koppel did a couple of programs about bio-warfare, germ warfare, and that was immediately followed by the anthrax attacks. And remember, as long as people are crashing into skyscrapers in the middle of the biggest city, there are hundreds of millions of people that say, that's not going to come to me. But sure enough, every time you went to your mailbox, which a lot of people do every day, and you look in there and you find, oh my God, are there spores? What is there here? So classical terrorism, probably too focused, too narrow to keep people's attention. I mentioned the fact that the British are on some kind of a rampage. Again, the British are typically trying to take advantage of what they think is the collapse of the U.S. to try to rebuild some kind of British bloc or British sphere. Don't join it is all I can tell people. Now, concerning the Malthusian campaign, that is coming up also. We're going to have this Paris conference. The Paris conference starts now within 2 weeks approximately, a little bit more. And that's going to be the Paris Malthusian conference about global warming and other obfuscations. Here we have again the case of evil doing good. And evil in this case is Secretary John Skull and Bones Kerry, who has been pointing out that the United States will not accept a legally binding agreement coming out of this Paris conference. So that essentially puts this whole thing into its proper perspective as an exercise in posturing and futility, because there will be no binding agreement. Hollande and Fabius are freaking out. Fabius also, I think, because one of his relatives has been indicted by the U.S., right? There's a whole thing going on about who's taking part in what drug transactions. And again, I know a lot of people, they immediately jump to the conclusion that the U.S. is always the worst. Maybe the U.S. is not always the worst, right? Maybe we should actually try to see what's going on. Anyway, you had it all, right? The Catholic bishops, no meat, no salami for you. We had the World Health Organization, no meat, no salami. The Catholic bishops say no coal and no oil. That would kill millions, more than millions, maybe hundreds of millions. And the Keystone Pipeline is rejected. This is all absolutely absurd. This is the politics of the surreal. And we're even told that Hollywood is now worried about an HIV-positive actor who may have infected a lot of them. So you can look on Twitter and see who everybody thinks this is. Finally, let's say something about what's going on certain campuses, right? The University of Missouri, Yale, Wesleyan, Ithaca College, and so forth. We're now in the world of political correctness and multiculturalism. I would say anybody who's on a campus, any student who's in a full-time university is actually enjoying some kind of a privilege. And if you're getting a scholarship, you certainly are. And if you got this through any kind of special dispensation, any kind of affirmative action, then I think you have to consider that you're getting some privileges. However, some people feel they can't get along without a grievance, and therefore they have invented these things called microaggressions. I would say a million student march this week. It's on 12th of November, $15 per rate, end of debt. I think that's better than demands raised at Missouri. There are no class-based demands whatsoever. So I'm for demonstrations with class-based demands. See you next week on World Crisis Radio.